A Fight to Remember is back, and what a fight we've got to start the new series. We take you back to 1997. It was the birth of a new era in the super middleweight division. It's Calzaghe against Eubank. Eubank in his 50th fight tried to win back the WBO title that he had held for 3 years and defended on 14 occasions. The unbeaten Welsh Dragon with his toughest assignment and his biggest night to date. And who better to take a look back on that famous night than the man who put it all together. Frank Warren's on the sofa, and alongside two men who followed Calzaghe's career with a great deal of interest, Declan Warrington and Ron Lewis. This was, I suppose, the start of a special journey for you, Frank.
It was. It was interesting how the fight came about, because what happened was Joe fought himself into the mandatory WBO spot, and the mandatory, or the champion, was Steve Collins, and Steve Collins decided that he would vacate the title.
Wasn't he officially injured?
He was injured. You know, he vacated for injury, whatever it was, but he vacated the title. So Joe was the obviously was to fight the next available guy. It was short notice, and Chris Eubanks was in training, and so we made the fight.
I'll ask you a bit more about Eubank in due course, but it's a classic matchup, isn't it, in terms of the generations, the passion of the torch, the old versus the new, Declan?
In so many ways, Calzaghe was unlucky to have missed out on that era being at its peak with Eubank, Ben, Collins, etc. Probably could have made a lot more money, at least in the early stage of his career. But there were a lot of doubts about Calzaghe going into this fight, still doubts that lasted for the best part of the next 10 years until he fought Lacey. You know, people saying he was a slapper, etc. For my money, Eubank was still a pretty live opponent, and Calzaghe really did prove himself. Yeah,
very much so. There was a feeling, I think, at the time, Ron, that it was maybe the end of the line for Eubank, his very last chance, perhaps?
Well, yeah, I mean, he'd obviously lost twice to Collins, you know, going into that, and it had been a good sort of like 3 or 4 years almost before he'd, you know, been at his or near his peak. And Calzaghe was a very strong up-and-coming fighter. I mean, he was, what, 22-0, and he'd stopped 21 of them, and people called him a slapper late in his career. I don't think anyone really was at this point. He was still a very good puncher. He was flattening people, really. He was beating people very quick. And it was only really after this, it was only really after the Robin Reed fight that he started getting terrible hand problems, and he adapted his style for that. But certainly at this stage, he had all the speed everyone remembers him for, but he had a fair bit of power, especially in that left hand too.
10 first-round knockouts. He'd never been beyond the 8th round, in fact, coming into this one. How did you get Eubank? He'd been fighting out in Dubai, at the Lawn Tennis Club there?
He split with Barry Hearn, and he went off and done his own thing. He promoted, I think he went to Egypt. If I remember rightly, he changed his name to Mohammed, whatever it was, in Egypt. He became a Muslim when he was out there, and then came back here. I'd given him, he'd fought on a few of my shows. And the funny thing, I think Chris fought for me about 5 or 6 times. He only ever won one fight, and that was against Ray Close. And the rest of them, he lost the fights. But it was, for Joe, he was in dispute at the time with his manager, his promoters, and he came with me, and that was late Terry Lawless and Mickey Duff. And there was a hearing at the board, and that was ongoing, and they tried to stop the fight. And Terry Lawless at the time said that this was too much of a step up for him. You know, it shouldn't be allowed to happen, etc., etc. And I sort of pressed really hard to get the fight on. I felt that it would be a tough fight for Joe. You know, Chris is as we all know, he's a tough guy. He's a warrior. He's got a great chin, and I knew he would bring the best out of Joe, and so it was. I mean, it was, you know, for me, it was his coming out party, but. You know, and we'll talk about it obviously later in the programme, but I don't think he got the recognition he should have got for that fight.
Yeah, absolutely. It was the start of an amazing journey. He was to replicate and then better what Eubank had been doing previously, Declan.
Well, I'd say he bettered Eubank massively, yeah. I think Calzaghe was a far better fighter than Eubank ever was, and Eubank at his peak was a very good fighter. This was, I think when you got an upcoming star like Calzaghe was, Frank would have known what a good fighter he was going to be. You want them to get, you know, go for a test like this. You know, ideally when the fighter's approaching his big night, he probably already would have been cut. He'd already suffered a knockdown, come through it, remain composed. Calzaghe had, because he was such a good fighter, had quite an easy career to that stage. His biggest test might have been Mark Delaney or something. Yeah. Eubank was a big step up, but again, Calzaghe responded as special fighters do when they're forced to show their highest level.
Good time in boxing, Ron. Nassim Hamed was on the undercard. For me, one of my favourite Hamed performances when he beat Jose Padilla. He was terrific that night, jabbing from distance and all sorts. And I think England got that famous 0-0 draw in Rome just a few hours earlier that evening as well to qualify for France '98.
Well, I mean, one of the things about Joe not getting the recognition, though, it was actually almost the start of the rebirth of Eubank's reputation, because he'd always been like the hate figure. And this is his performance in this fight, followed by his performance in the 2 Carl Thompson fight. Suddenly, almost the crowd turned on him, turned around on him, because he was seen as all very brave performances, and essentially made him into a bit more of a Renaissance figure than he already thought he was. So,
but I think it was more about, when you look at the fight, it was more about Eubanks losing rather than Joe winning. That's what I got quite upset about. And the broadcaster at the time who showed the fights, I said to him, we should be praising what he's done. You said earlier it's the passing of the baton or the crown, whatever you want to call it. And Joe for me was, I banged the drum from the beginning about him. I wanted to sign him day one, but he signed with Mickey Duff and he eventually came with me. But I always felt that he was the best super middleweight of all the generations since I've been in, since the division come into being. Better than Nigel Benn, better than all of them. He'd have beaten all of them. And it was also a step up for him. This was all done short notice, this fight. It wasn't like, because Steve decided to, Steve was found that he didn't want to fight because of his medical problem. So Joe's suddenly been training to fight Steve Collins. Now he's fighting, a legend, probably a guy that he looked up to when he was fighting. This guy's in front of him, so he's got to change his whole tactics. As much as it's short notice for Eubanks, who was also training for a fight, it was very short notice for Joe. And I thought he showed a lot of character in not. It wasn't just. In the fight, it was leading up to the fight. I want it. I want to fight him. There was it was not one doubt of, can't we find somebody easier, or have I got to fight him? It was great. Want it, got it, and that was it.
And all of that, and everything that made Calzaghe such a great fighter that we later learned. You see in this fight, if you get a chance to watch it in its whole entirety, please do it. We're going to show you as much of it as we can tonight, starting with the explosive first round.
Fight number 50 for Chris Eubank. But is this a comeback born of desperation for money and a craving for limelight? Or has Eubank rediscovered a genuine desire to restate his credentials? And what about Calzaghe? Untried. And let's go with the left hand straight away. Eubank may... I didn't know whether he might just try to catch Calzaghe cold.
Well, Calzaghe is a very fast starter, 10 first-round wins.
Oh, and the left hand puts Eubank on the floor for only the 5th time in his career. What a start by Calzaghe. He means business, all right, this Welshman. Eubank is smiling. He was only down for about 2, but had to take a mandatory 8. What a start.
I said 10 first-round wins, no chance of him being caught a little bit cold. A beautiful punch from Joe Calzaghe and a wonderful start.
Well, if he was suffering from any butterflies, he won't be now. He does have to watch Eubank on the counter, though, because Eubank has proved more than once that he's dangerous as a counter-puncher. I think Eubank actually mouthed to Calzaghe across the ring. Good shot. And there's another. Calzaghe left. This is the reality for Eubank now of his comeback. Forget the theme tunes and the posturing. Calzaghe's been telling us for a long time that he is a real factor in this super middleweight equation. A lot of people, quite good judges, have said they don't think he can really fight, that he slaps, that he's an arm puncher.
Well, I think he showed with that punch. He's certainly not an arm puncher, and I think his 21 knockouts and 22 fights suggest he isn't.
Remember, Eubank has never been stopped, but Calzaghe is working him over in this first round. Eubank is in some trouble here. He may need all his resilience and solid chin to get through this. And Calzaghe is setting a pace that Eubank does not like. And these punches, head and body, are thudding home.
Well, a terrific start from Joe Calzaghe, letting every punch in the boot go.
So really exciting stuff from Calzaghe. Who said that he might suffer stage fright? Forget that. Eubank somehow has to weather this.
And a good right hand there.
Calzaghe's even moving through the shuffles now. He's loving the big stage. Head, body shots. I've always had the suspicion with this fellow that he's very heavy-handed. I watched him in the gym one day at work, and you just had that impression. Oh, what a start by Calzaghe.
You make a plan and then you try and put it into effect, but that must have started way beyond Joe Calzaghe's wildest dreams. But it was a real statement of intent. You take even the knockdown aside, it was the way he went about the job.
That's how Joe fought. You know, Joe's fighting, you know, at his best is all about pace. You know, he's very fast. He lets lots of shots go. And Eubank's actually, to his credit, said that's the hardest he'd ever been hit as a professional. So much for the slapping Joe. But, you know, Joe just created a pace. He was very comfortable. He was on top. And he, you know, and that was the way to fight Eubanks. You know, Chris Eubanks, you look at all his lot of his early fights and when he was champion, you know, he'd do a bit of work, then he'd stop and he'd walk around the ring and people just watch, you know, the opponent would watch him. Steve Collins didn't allow that to happen when he fought him. As soon as the bell went, jump on him, make him work 3 minutes of the rounds. And that was tough for him. As much as he's got, you know, he's a tough guy, Chris, he's got a big heart, but making him work all the time was his undoing. That's where he struggles, and that's what Joe did. He'd come out, set the pace. I mean, he just sat about him, didn't he? Didn't give him a minute's respite.
And Declan, you could see everyone wanted to be there. Richard Branson was ringside. At the boxers as well, though. Herbie Hyde, Carl Thompson, Nassim Hamed was sitting next to Frank.
Yeah, I dare say that was largely more because it was Chris Eubank as well. I mean, obviously others on the bill, Nassim Hamed, etc. as well, but Eubank was a draw going into this fight. There's an interesting anecdote Calzaghe will actually tell, which highlights the difference between the two of them going into this fight, if nothing else. Calzaghe, years before, as a teenager, had told one of his best friends, I can beat Chris Eubank now. And this is when Chris Eubank was at his peak. His mate laughed him off, as almost any teenager would have done, and it really, really annoyed Calzaghe. It really wound him up, and there he is, years later, fighting him.
Yeah, perspective. And also, I mean, when Eubank made his debut, I think Calzaghe was about 13.
Well, and that's with any passing of the torch.
Yeah,
you can do those
exactly.
ones, isn't it? But Joe was always a guy, though. I never knew him the slightest bit fazed by an opponent. Everyone he ever fought, he thought, I can beat him. I can beat him. He was almost so down to earth with it. He didn't. He never read into any of the sort of crap around it. And it was just you know, he would just say, look at the fighter. I can beat him. I know how to do it.
But he did fight. Joe fought everybody there was to fight. You know, both at the time or just before that fight, the hot fighter around was Michael Nunn. You know, neither Nigel Benn nor Chris Eubank wanted to fight him. I mean, I'm telling you, did not want to fight him. When they fought each other, the winner's supposed to have fought Michael Nunn, and they wanted no part of that. And that's the difference with Joe. You know, you fight anyone.
Well, one thing I remember is the champion who was champion for most of his reign was Sven Otka, and I remember the Sauerland saying to me, they didn't want to make the fight. They didn't want to make the fight. And they, you know, they didn't want the fight in Germany. They didn't want the fight full stop. They said we're not interested in the WBO title.
By his own
and he was WBA and IBF champion.
But by his own admission, though, Calzaghe wasn't fazed by opponents, but he will say he was fazed by the occasion because he wasn't used to media attention. He wasn't the most confident personality anyway. And he actually said he burnt up so much nervous energy before his fight. Usually, super middleweight limit, as you know, is 12 stone. Usually he weighed about 12.10, 12.12 for a fight. For this, he came in at 12.4 because he couldn't eat properly. He'd wound himself up quite a lot. He got to the arena too early, so warmed up too early. That's probably partly why he started in the way that he did.
Yeah, lightning fast, and he was very much in command through the first 4 rounds as we take you into the 5th.
It's the 5th round. Eubank, former champion at middle and super middleweight. looks to regain the title. Left open by Steve Collins' retirement. Calzaghe won't give Eubank a second.
That's how I've got it with Calzaghe in a 4-point lead, making such a good start, that 10-8 round in the first.
Good left hand from Eubank. Calzaghe's chin is passing the test, isn't it? Here, some wondered about that because we've never seen him put under pressure before.
Well, he's had to take some good punches inside. Eubank's uppercut is working well, but Calzaghe's took it well.
The only time Calzaghe was taken the distance was by Eubank's cousin, actually, Bobby Joe Edwards. And Calzaghe was giving lumps of weight away to him.
This Edwards a cruiserweight, that's 2 weights up from Calzaghe, so that's a lot of weight to give away, but he won very easily. Well, it's hotting up the action in centre ring.
And Calzaghe's the one who, for my money, is getting the better of it. He's the one who's forcing Eubank backwards. There is a real intensity and desire about Calzaghe here. Can he sustain it? He may have to go the full 12-round route against this fellow. Back came Eubank with a very good countering right and a right uppercut. Now it's a trade-off. Eubank fought his way off those ropes well. He is dangerous with his back to the ropes like that.
Yes, he is, but Calzaghe's setting such a terrific pace when he caught Eubank several times.
Oh, big left and a right. And Eubank, how did he stay up from those? 2-punch combination. Eubank was staggered, but he seems to have this capacity for his head to clear almost instantly.
He looks a little bit hurt, Eubank. The legs are just starting to betray him, looking a little heavy.
Wants to hold on, buy a bit of time, but goodness me, didn't Eubank show some resilience there? He's breathing heavily though, Eubank. This is hard for Eubank now. He's going to have to come from a long way off the pace if he wants this to be a glory night for him.
Some really good toe-to-toe exchanges there. A couple of big left hands from Joe Calzaghe, and he was answering everything on that night. He had an answer for. Frank, I wanted to ask you about Eubank. Given the travails you've had perhaps in more recent years dealing with him, what was he like to promote and deal with back then as a fighter?
You know, he's always been difficult to deal with. His view of, you know, how things. He's always telling you what you should do, how you should do it, and. In fact, is, you know, I'm the promoter, I'm putting the money up, and this is, you either want the fight or you don't, and if you want the fight, here's the money, and let me get on with my, you know, get on promoting it. But he's, you know, Chris is one of those guys, if he gets a little bit of what you, I don't know if you would call it power or whatever, if he gets the edge, it's impossible sometimes to deal with. And I remember for this fight, when we was negotiating the purse, we was arguing over, I mean, it was about 50 grand or whatever it was. You know, how much he wanted and how much I wanted to pay, and that's how far apart. So he said, let's play spoof for the money. I said, OK, let's do it. So we played spoof, I won. Played spoof, I won. And we'd done this about 6 or 7 times, and Andy Alien was there, and then he won one. You know, I mean, I had a roll of these things, and, you know, by the time we're playing it again, I thought, you know, I'm not even... you know, I'm not even paying attention to it. And then when he won, right, that's it, I'm getting the 50 grand. I said, we only lost 7 before that. But that's what it was. But the one thing about that, when you look at that fight, Eubanks and with Joe, 2 best chins in the business. I mean, they both got caught in that round. I mean, Joe caught him with some good shots, and he did. But they both had really good chins, great resilience.
You ever play spoof for 50 grand, Declan?
No, not yet.
Me neither.
Yeah.
What you did see in that was Calzaghe was always going to have an answer. He was going to find a way, even if it didn't come down to ability, which it did.
The adaptability, one of Calzaghe's strengths. Frank mentioned his work rate, his speed, which again would stay with Calzaghe throughout his career, but he could adapt to his opponents as he needed to. Did that there brilliantly. Did it throughout the fight.
Ron, would Calzaghe just have been a nightmare for Eubank, even at his very best?
Yeah, because one of the things I remember once Arthur Abraham talking to me about Calzaghe and why he admired him, and what he used to do was he used to throw a lot of punches, but some of them were soft punches, and then he'd stick a really hard one in, and so the opponent facing him didn't know if they were actually going to get a soft punch they could walk through and try and counter off, or if it was going to be a hard shot that was actually going to pin him right back on the ropes, and that makes it impossible to fight against.
If you ever watched him warm up, you went, if you see him in the gym, his dad trained him, Enzo trained him, and he used to take him on the pads. And as Joe was throwing punches, he'd be throwing the pad, so he'd be catching the punches. So you'd see Joe, the pad, it was there, so he couldn't turn his arms into if he was throwing hooks. So as he's throwing his shot, it'd start off there, and as he got the momentum and the power in, so it was like bang, 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 and the last punch, or boom, boom, and crack it over, and that is what that was all about. And I think that become a habit from the pads. So I know a lot of journalists who say he's a slapper. He wasn't a slapper. That's how it was. It bosh, and the big one would do you.
Almost so he's
And you're talking about the best. Joe at his best. Remember, that wasn't Joe at his best. That was Joe learning. That was him coming through. The both of them at their best. Chris Eubanks at his best. Joe Calzaghe at his best. For me, every time Joe.
Well, every round, pretty much, for Joe up to this point. As we're approaching halfway, we'll take you into the second half of the fight after this. You're watching A Fight to Remember, the new series kick-started by Calzaghe against Eubank. Calzaghe with that knockdown in the first, dominating through the first 6 rounds. We take you into the 7th.
Here's round 7. Eubank again goes for the fast start. Can he break Calzaghe's resistance? Well, it's a punch-for-punch trade-off.
From the far side of the ring, Herbie Hyde on his feet, Nazim Hamed on his feet. Really enjoying this fight.
Well, they're going to talk about this one for some time, whatever happens. We have a real battle of wills. If Eubank can win this, after everything that's happened, you'd probably have to put it down as his biggest win since the day he became WBO middleweight champion against Nigel Benn in that Birmingham Classic back in 1990. But that's a big if. Whose will break first here? Calzaghe is well ahead, but Eubank's spirit is far from broken, you sense.
Calzaghe a little quieter in this round. He's fought at such a pace, he's got to be starting to tire.
Both of them will have enormous respect for each other already, I would think. Calzaghe has already answered a lot of questions, but he hasn't answered the ultimate question, which is, can he win and beat somebody like Eubank?
Calzaghe a little tired in this round. He's looking to hold on a little bit more, and this is his quietest round.
Well, they're just both on the floor. There's no knockdown there that I could see anyway. And Joe Cortez sees it the same way. Well, if Eubank is tight at the weight, you could have fooled me.
Certainly could. He's fought at such a pace and he's took such heavy punches.
And that's a tribute to how hard he's worked for this. Oh, big right from Eubank on the bell, and I think he would have taken that round. Is he on the way back?
A little bit of the histrionics. Eubank with his hands in the air. Whether that was to encourage himself, Frank, or to try and get the crowd into it.
Yeah, I think it's his way, isn't it? All that sort of posing and walking back to the corner slow, standing up and all that. You know, he must have drove his Ronnie Davis and whoever was in the corner on that night, drove him round the bend, because all you get to the corner, sit down, take your minute's rest. What would you be doing all that for?
Absolutely. And Declan, actually, so he had a go. There was a period through the sort of 7th and 8th rounds where he came out fast for 30 seconds, but he quickly retreated. Calzaghe was very much back on the front foot.
And he's back on him, yeah.
Yeah, but Eubank, I mean, like you said, he was having a good go. That was a good round for him. He'd vowed before the fight, he said, I'm going to take Calzaghe in the trenches. He'd never been there before. Calzaghe hadn't. He had it all his own way until then. Calzaghe, if you hear him talk about his fight now, it's interesting. He says when they fell over there, he really struggled to get back up because he was so tired. His body was hurting so much because Eubank, with all his tricks, he was just taking him, making him fight in a way he hadn't had to previously.
And actually, he was fighting a guy who was in the process of looking towards light heavy. I think those two fights that Frank mentioned out in Dubai and in Egypt, he'd fought at about 177 pounds, I think.
Yeah, that would be normal for a sort of fight like that, though, wouldn't it? I mean, you wouldn't expect him to
but
boil down.
He was
to
targeting light heavy.
Yeah,
at the time.
he was. And actually, if you look at the fight at this stage, if you look at his feet are slightly behind him already, and all his best shots are actually being thrown from a long way out. And Joe, you know, is possibly not picking him out. He's so determined to get close and get on him. Those are the best punches landing for Eubank, but his feet, his hands are a long way out in front of his feet there.
He was looking a lot heavy until his fight fell into place. It was Mark Prince he was lined up to fight, and that incidentally would have been a good fight as well.
We're going to miss the 8th because we're going to move on into the championship rounds, but in the 8th there's a little cameo where he's back. He's got his back, Eubank, against the ropes, exactly where you're sitting with Nassim Hamed. And Hamed's obviously having a little go. Hamed had been
they didn't like each other. You know
what was the history of that?
Well, Naz, apparently Chris, the story is Chris was in Brendan Ingle's gym up in Sheffield, and Naz said that all this, you know, the posing and the jumping over the ropes, he nicked it off of him, he pinched it off of him. And that was a bit of a thing. And they wound up having a terrible argument at Heathrow Airport. We were
2 weeks after this fight.
Oh, it was after the fight.
Yeah, 2 weeks later.
It culminated in that after the fight, and then they had quite a bit of a confrontation.
Was there blows? The reports are. You were there.
I was there, right in the middle of it. You know, Chris was Chris could be very condescending, and he's telling him you're only a young boy and all this, and they're having these words again. And Naz, being Naz, gone, you know, he's told him to sort of basically piss off. And the next minute, Naz had his belt on his championship belt on top of his trolley and his luggage, and Chris grabbed it and threw it across the floor. So Naz went ballistic, just jumped on him, and he was going to do it. And I sort of jumped to him. I said, right, enough's enough, stop it. You know, you're going to get in trouble. Someone's going to get in trouble here. But I'll tell you what, Naz did not back off at all.
That's a nice catch weight fight, isn't it?
That was a serious catch weight fight.
Hamed,
Think about that. You know, Chris probably walking around light heavyweight, and Naz, Naz in those days probably walking around about, maybe top weight, light welter, but he absolutely did not take a backward step.
He could punch like a super middleweight, Hamed, there's no doubt about that. And that fracas at the airport, Hamed was away to America to start to build up towards and promote the Kevin Kelly fight, which was in the December of that year. We're back to business, though. We're going to take you into the championship rounds, and the first of those, the 10th.
Crowd here absolutely enraptured by this, as they were earlier on, watching the other fights. And as a bonus on the screen tonight, England's famous night in Rome. Pity about the crowd trouble. Nothing like that here. Tenth round. Calzaghe with a left-hand counter. Eubank touchdown with his gloves. That has to be a knockdown. He's saying, I slipped. I don't think so. It was a left hand. He's not hurt by it, but technically his gloves touched the canvas, and that has to go down as a knockdown.
There was a sharp little punch in there. The quick reflexes of Joe Calzaghe just caught Eubank lunging in. He had to touch down with both his hands.
And the way they score these things, that may cost him extra points as well. Eubank's talking to Calzaghe.
I'm sure he'll be worried about that, Eubank.
Of course, in the past, Eubank has, well, how can I put it, had a few favours, it seems, from the judges. But this is a different setup. Can Calzaghe keep this going?
Well, I must say I'm impressed with Calzaghe. In the past, he's never really shown me that he's a mature fighter. He's got the job done that quickly. We haven't really seen what he's got, but in this fight, he's showing he's got a great deal of talent.
This is the fight I think he wanted. He wanted to prove to the world that he can operate at this level. He's looked exciting too, doing it here. And that is, of course, going to make him a bit of a seller. Robin Reid, the WBC champion, is watching this, and I'm sure he's working out a few things about strategies and styles for if he should be meeting Calzaghe somewhere down the road. I know he is. Fighters do. But this argument isn't settled yet. Enzo, Calzaghe's dad, in the corner, his trainer, shouting out to him, saying, don't get idle. Enzo, who was brought up in the same village as Gianfranco Zola in Sardinia. All kind of angles linking things up tonight.
I think credit to Enzo. I think people have wondered whether a father and son relationship works, but certainly it's working with this father and son because he's prepared his son tremendously well for this contest.
Yes, if it is a Calzaghe triumph, it will be a family triumph. Quiet around.
Yeah, starting to tire. I think Calzaghe has said in retrospect that he was knackered after 5. Not that you would have noticed it by his performance through the latter stages of that fight. As ever, Eubank fighting in spurts. Ian Dart mentioned in commentary there, Ron, about the relationship between father and son. Some of the Calzaghe's harshest critics wonder aloud what would Joe have been like with another trainer. What would you say to that?
Well, that's true, but one of the great things that made the relationship work is Joe's always been a very big homeboy, and you know, it worked for them that they worked, you know, at their own gym. He lived at home. Had Joe come out of South Wales and sort of moved to London or gone to America, could he have stood it? I don't know. He might have been a greater fighter, but he was, you know, he was a pretty great fighter. Was Calzaghe anyway,
yeah, it's a good
wasn't
point. That being comfortable and being relaxed in your own skin
happy,
and in your environment.
Because Joe was champion for such a long time. This is one of his great credits, and to be able to continue to do it year after year after year, and you know, maybe he had a shorter career. Who knows? But you know, the fights weren't really around for him to, in a way, be better.
Let me talk about the fights that could have been made. I mean, they say that Collins didn't want it, so that's what they say.
He had there was something, you know, he had something on his X-rays, come up on an X-ray that he had, so he vacated the title.
And what about later dates? Say
Roy Jones didn't want it, and then he went up in weight. He did not want it. We made an offer to him.
Hopkins,
we'd done Don King, myself and Jay Larkin, who was the in charge of boxing at HBO. We agreed a deal, agreed to terms. Hopkins was on the lines. The next day, Hopkins come back and asked for double the amount of money that we agreed on.
So he priced himself
out. It didn't happen. You know, there was quite a few of those fights, and then there were the fights where Joe. There were some pretty average performances, and there was a lot of things going on in his life. There was, for me, one of the big problems in him. You know, he was continue getting hand injuries, and that was his own fault because he'd insist on wrapping his hand. He'd drop him a bit of old gauze, and then stick his hand in the glove, and that was it. And as he took the glove off, at the end, he'd go, "Oh, my hands hurt," and take his glove off, and all the bandage would fall off. I've never seen anything like it. You know, and before a fight, championship fight, each corner sends a representative, or each camp sends a representative to the ring to check and watch and eat. And I can remember looking, you know, people who I knew from the opponents looking at them saying, "What's going on here?" They thought somebody was up to something. Just this old bit of bandage around him, you know, it's like it was. And there was those things. There was a time when Joe came to see me, and he talked about that he maybe felt he wanted to change as a trainer, and that nearly happened.
Do you remember when that was?
It was around you know, sort of that time. He fought David Starry, if you remember, and it was around that time. But you know, the thing about his dad probably got the best out of him, in fact, because it was his dad.
Yeah.
So he's in the corner, and and his dad would. You heard his instructions. I mean, you had to delete most of it, you know, bleep it out, because he would be, come on, get up.
But he knew the buttons to push.
Yeah, and he just, like, you know, it's like if your dad tells you that, you know, you think when you're a young lad, your dad's onto you, you do it for your dad.
And actually, Declan, just a few years ago, when he was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame, you could see how much it meant to Joe that he'd done that with his dad.
Yeah.
Some of the scenes we saw between the pair were quite emotional, quite special.
That's something he has spoken about since. There was a time where there was pressure to change trainer, but he didn't do it, and he's so glad he didn't. And in hindsight, why would he? Because he couldn't have achieved any more than he did.
The pressure weren't from us. He was the one that Joe wanted it. When he came to me, I remember writing to him after, and I still got the letter. I wrote to him and said, "Come to see you. You know, I hear what you're saying, and we'll explore it." But it was him at the time saying, "I feel that I need to change."
Arguably, Enzo Calzaghe wasn't a great trainer, or wasn't for most fighters, but for Calzaghe there was just an element of the perfect storm. Perhaps he was the best trainer for Joe Calzaghe.
Enzo did well with him, and Enzo, you know, a couple of other fighters he done okay, but you know,
he had 3 world champions at the same
yeah,
time.
but also he did, and at that time, I can remember the Lacey fight, and I know we've done it on a previous programme. I mean, you know, he was pulling out of that Lacey fight 100%. His dad rang me. I talked him into that, and he only talked him into the fight because he said he had a hand injury, but his dad said he's not really got a hand injury, and so it proved. I mean, you know, it was about 8 days later he fought, and he threw more punches in that fight than I think that any champion had ever done, or whatever it was. So there was a lot of stuff going upstairs with Joe, and there was a few problems going on, like he had some domestic problems and all that, and lots of things were going on during his career. And there was a time when I felt that it had been better for him to get away from that, but he didn't. He said he didn't like. He had a phobia of flying. That was a load of rubbish. You know, he went on holidays, on planes, but he didn't want to go anywhere, you know, and that at times was tough. And then towards the end of his career, obviously, you know, he decided he wanted to fight abroad.
Well, it's Sheffield for the time being, and the final couple of rounds we're going to show you in due course after this. Welcome back. Calzaghe against Eubank from 1997, and we are into the final few rounds. We take you to the 11th.
6 minutes left. 6 minutes for Eubank to rescue it. Otherwise, it looks like Calzaghe's night. But we've seen Eubank turn things around before. One doesn't like to really raise the subject as Glenn's scorecard, but do you remember the 11th round of the terrible and tragic second fight with Michael Watson? But what happened in the ring there was that Eubank turned things around when he was facing defeat, and that's what's relevant maybe in this equation.
Well, I think he's still got a fighter's heart, but remember, he's a good deal older now, and he's been through a lot more fights, and his career is much farther advanced. So whether he can pull something out at this stage, you know, we're yet to see.
Still Calzaghe taking the fight to Eubank. Funnily enough, Eubank's old trainer, Ronnie Davis, who was with him 9 years, predicted that Calzaghe would win. He said he'd be too fast and powerful for Eubank. Interesting.
Well, that's proving right. But it must have been hard to come down away. But Calzaghe, you can't take nothing away from Calzaghe. He's really shown to be a mature and a very good fighter.
Yes, it looks as if he's going to turn himself from being regarded as a talented prospect with a few question marks about him to somebody we have to take pretty seriously. He's up now in the big money league, Calzaghe, if he can hold on to this. Eubank may be saving himself for one last desperate rally.
Eubank's lunging, he's looking for the big punch. Just dropping his head a little bit inside there, I'm sure. He's very, very tired.
Calzaghe has hit him with so many big punches. Eubank has got through with plenty of his own here. He's hoped that somewhere along the line Calzaghe would snap, but it hasn't happened, and it's getting late.
This has been a much quieter round, not a great deal happening. Maybe Eubank's trying to suck it all in this round for a big finish.
No knockdown, just his momentum took him there. Breathing heavily, just moving a little unsteadily on his legs as well now. Eubank, he's kind of shuffling around the ring.
Yes, he's looking heavy and looking to fall forward onto Calzaghe. Again, he tries that lunging right hand.
His chin was always one of his great assets, of course, and it's held him in good stead tonight. 3 minutes left.
Yes, 3 minutes left for Calzaghe to put his name up in lights and on that WBO belt. Did Joe talk about this much with you in years gone by about the experience of this night?
Yeah, I mean, he always said it was one of. I always thought it was one of his best performances, and he did as well. You know, he said that it was one of his toughest fights, and it was a tough fight. I mean, it's fought quite a pace, and you can see both of them towards the end. Both of them are tiring, but it would do if you find at that speed. But Joe acknowledges that it was one of his tougher fights.
In the build-up to the Kessa fight, he actually said it was his toughest.
Yeah.
Now, Kessa, Hopkins, perhaps he may have found them harder fights in different ways, but I think even without speaking to Joe, you could quite safely say physically this is probably his hardest fight.
Yeah, it's the sort of test you normally get maybe in, say, a British title fight along the way, as opposed to in a world title challenge. Robin Reid was ringside as well. He was, I think, the WBC champion, was he, at the time?
Yeah.
They would meet 3 fights later on.
Sadly he'd lost his title by then, so it stopped it being a unification. But yeah, I mean Reid is someone who that's an obvious big fight, isn't it? And it was showing our super middleweight pedigree going through there. Suddenly you've had this great series, and then sort of Reid was the guy coming on after him, and then Calzaghe came along and topped them all. So yeah, I mean. Looking at this, it's amazing that 11 years later he still held the same world title, isn't it? And that's some sensational fighter. And people always look back, and in a way, because he reigned for so long, he really put a big sort of shadow over all the guys he fought, because there weren't guys. The world champions he fought only sort of held world titles for a sort of short time, because he was champion for so long. In a way, he cleaned up all the good fighters in the division. So the guys who either held the title before him or briefly held, he fought a few guys who briefly held the WBC title or whatever. And so you look at a lot of guys' records now and you look back at him and you think, oh, he was a world champion, he was a world champion, he was a world champion. But Joe kind of just beat them all either when they were getting to their peak or picked him off after they'd done someone else in the division. So, he was that good.
Indeed. Did you want to add something?
No, just saying. He did. As I say, he didn't duck anyone. Most guys were ducking him. And the fight with Robin Reid was quite an interesting fight because he broke his hand in that fight, and it was a close fight. Robin was a good fighter, but I thought Joe won it, and that upset Robin with me. I mean, he would work with me, and then after that, I always say how it is. I mean, I'm not saying my opinion's right, but you're going to ask me who do you think won. One, we're going to tell you what you want to hear, tell you what I think. And I thought Joe won that fight, but it was there were some superb performances from Joe, and there was some like the David Starry fight and a couple of fights of that were pretty boring. But then it takes two to tango. David Starry got a shot at the world title, and he didn't exactly come, in my opinion, to win the world title. He just come to survive, and when guys are coming to survive, it's difficult to fight them.
Well, it was down to the closing stanza then as we take you into the coronation, into the 12th round.
Well, Eubank's jodhpurs and cane and posturing and extravagant lifestyle count for nothing here. He's put up a tremendous fight, but Calzaghe, for the most part, has been boss. And Eubank now surely needs a knockout. Last round.
And you can guarantee he knows that, and you can guarantee he's going to go for it. Calzaghe still got that bounce in his step, still looks reasonably fresh.
But if he's sensible, Calzaghe, he may just look to box this through and be too cautious, maybe even. Just make sure he gets the victory. Remember Bruno in the last round against Bone Crusher Smith? What was he, 9 rounds ahead or something? Got knocked out in the last. Tried to go for the stoppage. Calzaghe's doing that here.
Yes, it doesn't look as if he's going to try and be cautious. He's fought this fight aggressively, on the attack, very confidently, and it looks as if he wants to finish the fight the same way.
Calzaghe has come of age. Still, all the work coming from Calzaghe. Eubank is very tired now, but he may keep his proud record of never having been stopped.
Calzaghe caught by a thumping right hand from Eubank.
His chin's been proved here, Calzaghe. You can put a tick against that in future now.
I think everything's been proved in this fight. He's got a punch, he's got the style, he's got a good chin.
And there's another Eubank right hand. Under a minute remaining. Eubank needing snookers.
Both land with good punches there. Calzaghe with the right, Eubank also with the right hand.
And still they want to trade to the last. This has been a superb fight.
Well, if Eubank's going to go out with this fight, if this will be his finale, he'll go out in style and putting up a tremendous battle.
Well, he may not go out after this. He can walk out of this ring with his head held high. Whether he would want to fight on. This has been another aging fight, really. But Calzaghe has answered the questions here. All of them in the affirmative. Calzaghe just stung by one right hand, you felt there, right towards the end. Holds on, there's the final bell. They embrace at the bell, the fusion of spirits. Calzaghe is lifted aloft. I think we all know which way the judges will see that. Joe Calzaghe has surely become a world champion, and Eubank's comeback has ended in failure, but in many ways, glorious failure.
See, that was it.
Success, glorious failure for Eubank. That'll annoy Frank. You probably weren't.
No, it is a glorious failure, but you know that should have been. And you know, it takes two to make a good fight, or you know, a competitive fight. But it was about the glorious winner, and I don't think he got the accolades for that fight. I really don't. And you know, to this day, I think it was all about typical British mentality. It's about the loser rather than about the winner. And that's where we are sometimes. And I just, you know, he was very valiant, Chris, and he did what he had to do. But Joe Calzaghe was also very valiant, and you know, and it was for me was a start of which became a legend in British boxing.
There wasn't really much doubt about who'd won it. The question was how wide, as we can hear now.
Ladies and gentlemen, we go to the scorecards. Dave Powers scores the bout 118 to 109. Paul Thomas scores it 116 to 111, and Roy Francis scores it 118 to 111 for the winner, who is now WBO super middleweight champion of the world, Joe Calzaghe.
A slightly younger Michael Buffer reading out those scores. 5 points in it for one of the judges. Probably a little too short, given there was 2 10-8 rounds, but there we are. It was pretty wide. probably comfortable hearing those scorecards for you.
Well, it was, but I thought he did win it. You know, as much as it was competitive, I thought he won most of the rounds, and you know, his work rate is what it is. He was throwing punches all the time, and that's what, you know, what Joe did, and he won it. As I say, I thought he won it, and I thought he boxed it really intelligently as well. It wasn't just, you know, you go and win titles and so on, but he knew what he had to do. He knew he had to make Chris Eubanks feel pressure, feel work rate, and that's what he done. As soon as that bell went, that big punch, and he never let up.
And it was the start of something quite special as well. Decades, 20-odd defences of that very belt he won on the night.
Yeah, to my mind, the start of the greatest career British boxing scene. I think Calzaghe is the best fighter we've ever had, possibly will ever have had. He, again, watching that fight, you talk about like the strengths everyone knows Calzaghe to have, but watching it back, I've forgotten how much they went to war. They're going to toe a lot, and Calzaghe took some really good punches and dished it out as well. I mean, he proved himself in. It wasn't just his skill set he was showing; he really proved his toughness that night. He had to dig in, and that was, you know, a terrific learning fight for the rest of his career. It really set him up nicely.
Before we finish up, because I want to ask you where that ranks in the top 3 of Calzaghe performances. Before I do that, a word on Eubank. He went on perhaps to enhance his reputation in the eyes of some fans, maybe hardcore fans, with his performances against Carl Thompson up at light heavy.
Well, again, he was showing something different, wasn't it? Because you know, most of his career he was this you know, almost arrogant character who came across as a bit of a bully, didn't he? And in that fight and the Thompson fights, he showed himself to be a brave fighter who was willing to, you know, there was you know, almost no backward stepping in there. You know, Joe was always confident that he was going to land the last shot in any exchange, wasn't he? And that's the confidence he took through it. You know, Eubank was taking the last shot in all those exchanges, and he stuck in there. There was no backing off in him, was there?
He was terrific. He ticked every single box for me that night. It's got to be in the top 3. My top 3, it has to be in there. The order I could argue about. Lacey, Kessler, Eubank. I'm not sure which order.
Kessler.
Okay.
Because I thought Kessler, at the time he fought him, was in his prime, and the first 3-4 rounds, Joe lost those rounds, and he had to, you know, change his game plan, which he managed to do. And that's what good fighters can do. He changed the whole dynamic of the fight, and I thought that was a superb night. I think he boxed really well. Lacey was a superb performance, and remember, going into both those fights, he was not the favourite. Both the other 2 guys were favourite. He was underdog in those fights, and I think then the Eubank fight, because obviously what happened on the night, and you know, it was that, you know, the young kid getting in there and showing the world what he was capable of.
Briefly, boys, your 1, 2, 3.
Lacey, Kessler and Hopkins. I mean, Hopkins was a scrappy fight, but I would actually argue that was Calzaghe's best win, even if not a best performance. But I mean, Lacey has to be first. He was immaculate that night.
Good debate, Ron.
Lacey, Kessler, I don't know, maybe Jones. There were a few other good fights in there. There was, you know, Mitchell was a hell of a performance, wasn't he, getting off the floor for the first time. You know, Brewer was a good performance. Woodall was a good performance. There were some good fights in there. And you know, you could look at that and say Eubank was obviously was up there because it was a big name. But, you know, he'd have still done Eubank.
The beauty is some of those have been fights to remember, and some of them will be fights to remember in a future series. Thanks, Ron. Thanks, Declan. And thanks to Frank as well. Thanks to you for watching on the night that the Pride of Wales, the Prince of Wales, became king of the super middleweights.